enhancement there.
You're listening to Head South Radio with your host, Kat Meyer, a podcast dedicated to prioritizing pleasure and removing the stigma and shame around sex. We're here to be curious and have an open conversation about sexual health and relational wellness. This podcast is intended for educational and entertainment purposes. The information discussed is not a substitute for professional medical advice.
So, Rena, we're going to get started by just settling into our seat. You can start to close your eyes or just soften your gaze. Let your shoulders begin to drape down your back, lengthening your neck, rooting into your sit bones. Start to grow taller through the crown of your head, creating some space in your spine, allowing your rib cage to hover just above your pelvic bowl. And then with that alignment and with that space, start to tune into your breath. Just noticing and observing your breath without a need to create a story or criticize or judge. All you're doing is witnessing your breath, making an observation of the quality of your breath right now. You don't need to change it. You don't need to manipulate it. You just get to watch it. And then with that same curiosity, take a moment to observe how you feel in your physical body. Scanning your body and just noticing any sensations, maybe noticing areas of tension, areas of lightness. And again, without a need to wrap a narrative around that experience, but just allowing your awareness to acknowledge what you're physically experiencing right now. And then take a moment for yourself. Think of an intention for the next 45 minutes for our conversation. And then taking your time, whenever you're ready, just start to blink your eyes open, taking in the light, taking in your space, taking in the screen.
Thank you. That was lovely.
You're very welcome. I really love grounding before initiating the conversation. It feels really good, especially because we are digitally connecting. It's a nice way to kind of both drop in. So thank you for joining me with that.
Yes. I've had a hectic morning, so that was exactly what I needed.
Awesome. So Rena, to get started, I'd love to know what your sun, moon, and rising sign are.
Ooh, so I am a Scorpio, Aquarius.
Oh, wow. Okay. When is your birthday?
November 4th.
Okay. Oh my gosh. Yeah. Because I always joke that I collect Scorpios like Pokemon. And it's funny because I have a group of friends. Whose birthdays are 5, 6, 7, 8 of November. And now you're number 4. So this is really cool.
Oh my gosh. The set is complete.
The set is complete. I finally got all my rings together. How do you like to be shown love?
Ooh, so if we're talking about the traditional love languages, which I know have been somewhat, kind of debunked at this point as being non-scientific, but a lot of people understand what that means. So words of affirmation tend to be my big one. But really, and this is actually something I talk about in my book, is this idea of using creativity as a love language. And so being creative in the quality time, in the words of affirmation, in the gifts, right? In the physical touch. So just anything that shows that there's intention and mindfulness around the expression of love, that's what I appreciate the most.
I love that. Would you rather sneeze every time you orgasm or orgasm every time you sneeze?
Oh gosh. Probably sneeze every time I orgasm because I tend to have sneeze attacks, and that can be fun and all, but in certain circumstances I probably don't want to invite that into my life or subject other people to that either.
If your sex life was a song, which song would you choose?
Ooh, gosh. There's this song, and I'm not sure that many people will know it, but it's a 60s song by a musician named Bonnie St. Clair, and it's called Tame Me Tiger. And it's just this kind
Oh.
of raw song. And lyrically, it talks about the idea of, this kind of burning passion between two people, but being tamed, right? And so there's a little bit of a hint toward power play as well, which is definitely a part of my sex life. So yeah, it's probably that one. So if that's a new song to anyone, go look it up.
What genre of music is that?
Oh gosh, I would say it's probably like garage fuzz. Definitely an obscure kind of B-side song. But I am a nerd for obscure 60s music. So
Yeah. Ooh, I love that.
that's me showing my music side there.
I'm going to definitely look at it. I haven't heard that song, but I'm a big fan of 60s music in general and like that era of music, 60s into the 70s for sure. And so I'll definitely look that song up.
Yay.
Who do you call first when you get great news?
Ooh, probably my anchor partner. His name is Dan. We are in pretty constant contact throughout the day. We don't live with one another. And yeah, he's usually my go-to.
Mm-hmm. And then what character traits do you look for or long for in someone else?
Good question. I think really it's kind of circling back to what we said earlier about the ways I like to receive love. It's somebody who isn't afraid to be expressive and vulnerable with their emotions and loves kind of with reckless abandon. That is really attractive to me.
And then would you rather give up kissing or give up orgasms?
Oh gosh, Kat, what are you doing to me? Is this just like in life or with a partner? Like, could I still have orgasms on my own?
Oh, that is a good, like diving deeper into that question. With a partner, we'll make it partnered.
Okay, I would give
And
up
so you can still-
orgasms with a partner. Yeah, I
Okay.
would give up orgasms with a partner because making out is pretty much my favorite thing in the entire world. So that I could not give up.
It's funny. I've asked that question to other guests, and I said the same thing of like kissing is like a time travel experience for me. Like orgasms happen and as a part of sex, and sometimes they don't happen. But a kiss specifically can take me to like 1995. Like it can take me to places, or like that music as well. Like music and kissing can like feel, or I can think about a kiss in a way to time travel, which I think is really
I love
cool.
that. Yeah. And because, we rarely, I'll speak for myself here. I rarely can remember, a specific orgasmic experience and isolate that, but I can definitely remember a really fantastic makeout session.
Yeah, same. So I would love, Rena, for you to introduce yourself. Tell us who you are, what you do. You've mentioned your book, which I'm currently reading and I'm loving. I'm like reading it and being like, oh, I so relate to so much of this. So I would love for you to introduce yourself.
Yes. Oh my gosh. I'm so glad you're enjoying it. My name is Rena Martine, and I am a women's intimacy coach. Also an author of a book called The Sex You Want, a shameless journey to deep intimacy, honest pleasure, and a life you love. Yes, that's the book you're holding up. And then a little bit about my background is I spent 14 years as a deputy district attorney with the Los Angeles County DA's office, where I specialized in sex crimes, child abuse, and domestic violence cases. So I am trauma informed. I've seen a lot. And my goal is to make this world a more shame-free and pleasurable place. And I do that in a variety of ways. So as a coach, as an author, I do some consulting, I do some speaking, I do some educating. So that's pretty much who I am.
Cool. Thank you. My next question is, I want to go back in time. What was your sex education like?
Uh, my sex education largely came from porn. My dad had a pretty vast porn collection of VHS tapes. I'm dating myself here. And they weren't just, out and about, but they were locked up and, curious minds. And so a lot of what I learned about sex came from porn. As far as comprehensive sex ed in school, I grew up here in Los Angeles. I'm in a blue state. We're not very conservative in this neck of the woods, but I still didn't get very much sex ed in school. And at that time, there wasn't really any focus around pleasure. And I don't know that there is at all today. But yeah, it's sad to say that my sex ed came from porn, and not ethically produced porn, but mainstream male gaze, male pleasure focused porn.
I was having a conversation with my cousin about this, of like he was saying that like he remembers the days of like moving the bunny ears to get like the static from like the porn channels, and seeing like a blurry boob was like his sex education.
Right.
And so yeah, it's not great, even in like blue states, non-conservative states, like even in families where, sex is talked about. There's always a missing piece. There's always something that gets, missed or misunderstood. And so thank you for sharing your story. What I wanted to comment about too with your book, and something I really enjoy about it, is, one of the things you mentioned was like, yeah, you can buy all of these self-help books, but they just become shelf-help books. And something I love about your book and the approach you took, because I've read many self-help books, not just specifically with sex and intimacy and relationship, but like spirituality, all of the books, you name them, I've read them. And I've been guilty of being a self-help person and like not doing the work and not doing the exercises within those books and not working with somebody. I have since kind of found like, oh yeah, you kind of need accountability. You need to do these things. But something I love about your book is that you share your own experiences. You share the stories of your first sex education, your experience through your first marriage, your own self-discovery, your own work professionally, and the transition, as well as like, so it makes it so relatable, because I've read self-help books and it's oftentimes like a clinician just sharing their clientele, their practice, but not their own stories. And so you kind of share both your stories, your, obviously anonymous clientele stories, protecting their identity, and then offering such helpful, useful, and like umbrella. So reading this, it doesn't have to be specifically to sex and intimacy. Some of these exercises can help in other buckets of life. So I just wanted to acknowledge that something I really enjoy about this book is your own experience, because it's so relatable and it's so enjoyable too, to kind of be like, oh, that's like me, or I know that feeling, or like, actually, I've been curious about that. And like reading somebody else's experience is really, really helpful. So I really appreciate that aspect of your book.
Thank you for sharing that. That is exactly what I intended in writing this book, was really bridging that gap from something that is just straight memoir that you're reading for maybe, to relate to it, but the more salacious aspects, and also that kind of ivory tower clinician point of view that we see very often with self-help books, because most are written by clinicians, academics, right, who aren't necessarily sharing from their personal life. And what I found in my own journey was that what helped me the most was from hearing from people like me. And so, as I state in the book, this is not meant to feel like being lectured to from an ivory tower or enlightened by a spiritual guru. This is meant to feel like a conversation between friends over a reasonably priced bottle of wine. And so having you share that really validates what I was hoping readers would get from this book. So thank you.
Yeah, it's exactly what inspired me to do Head South Radio and have these types of conversations. And I had noticed, my team and I had noticed that sometimes we bring on certain clinicians and they would be very like removed and very like, and science and data is wonderful. But I was like, I noticed our listenership shifted when there was more conversational, more relatable content versus just like data and information and science. And it's like when it's a hybrid, people really enjoy those episodes a lot because they feel seen and heard. They have like the information that backs it up, but there's something about like removing that fourth wall and being like human and being like, oh, I want to hear more from this person because there's a human aspect to it. There's a relatability. And so that's something I really, really wanted with the podcast is relational wellness as well. So I appreciate your book so much for offering that.
Yay. We're on the same page. No pun intended.
My next question for you is, how do you define intimacy?
Yeah. So intimacy is a knowing closeness, but also how you show up in the world. It's allowing yourself to be seen, right? Sharing yourself and allowing yourself to be seen, whether that is with another person, whether that's, saying fuck it and wearing a bikini to the beach anyway, whether that is saying, hey, I'm not going to put up with this at work and I'm going to lay down some boundaries. So, when people think of the term intimacy, a lot of folks think it's just this polite euphemism for sex. And the fact of the matter is, we can have sex, the mechanics of sex, right? We can have that, however you define sex, without actually showing any level of vulnerability there. We can have one night stands that are really performative, right? We can have sex where we're faking orgasms, where we're just not present. We can also have non-sexual intimate experiences where we're sharing very openly and vulnerably. So intimacy is showing up and showing up as your true self. My sweet spot, and, I work with clients in a variety of areas, but it's that sexual intimacy, right? It's the interplay between sex and intimacy, because a lot of people are capable of doing one and perhaps not the other at the same time. So, and that can come from a lot of reasons, trauma. It can come from keeping your guard up and having to be, the badass bitch during your day-to-day life, and then not knowing how to let your guard down and actually be vulnerable in your intimate relationships. So that's really a cornerstone of the work I do with a lot of my clients is boosting sexual intimacy.
And you mentioned most of your clients are women.
Yeah, most of my clients identify as women. I have a handful of men who I have worked with and continue to work with, and some couples I work with as well.
Mm-hmm. And then in your work, how do you address those things like shame that come up, or things that like where people get stuck? What does working with you look like?
Woof. Okay. So my coaching program, I have an 8-week program. So it's like a container. Think of it like a boot camp or a class you're taking for a semester at college. So it follows an arc. What we do is we start with what's going on the very just cognitive level, right? What is it that you want to experience that you haven't before? What are some of the stories you learned about what it means to be a woman or man, right? What it means to be physically attractive, what the purpose of sex is, what romantic love is, right? So just getting all of this out there. And then unlike a lot of other coaches, I actually do a lot of subconscious work with my clients, which you're like, what the heck does that mean, Rena, right? But because we now understand that 90% of our emotional operating system, our thoughts, our beliefs, our actions stem from the subconscious part of our brain. So the problem that I see is that many self-help books, most conventional talk therapy, a lot of podcasts are just hitting that tip of the iceberg, that top 10% of our logical, right? Our rational brain. So we do some subconscious work. I then do some kind of mind-body integration. And then we really focus more on sex and relationships. So we're doing just like straight up empowerment until we get to kind of the final third of our work together. That's where we dive into, okay, what are your fantasies? What are your kinks? And using tools that I have developed to figure out what those are, right? And then start exploring, okay, well, how do I invite more of this into my life? Say you're single. Okay, I know I want a relationship. How do I set up my dating profile, right? How do I find events that I could perhaps get involved with? So I really help my clients fine tune who they are and what they want so that they can work smarter and not harder. Because there's no lack of information out there these days, Kat. Like we are in a constant influx of information overload. And so I've had a lot of clients now who have read my book, who have come to me and said, all right, Rena, I just need someone to like hold my hand here and do this with me. I love that. And some of them have done the homework in the book because there are a lot of assignments in there. Some of them are like, okay, I blew through the book, but I am not disciplined enough to do the homework. Well, I'm going to make sure you do the homework kind of thing. So I am cheerleading you. But as a coach, I'm different than a therapist. I'm allowed to share from my own life. I'm also allowed to hold you accountable. And so I'm going to push you gently outside of your comfort zone, but I'm going to be your biggest cheerleader too.
I love that. I'm very familiar with this because I've been working with this past year, working towards doing subconscious sessions with clients and doing conversational hypnotherapy. And it's interesting because you do have to kind of distinguish, like, it's not therapy. I'm not a therapist. I also distinguish away from a coach because in the work that I do, it's actually not me doing the work. I'm holding the container of space. And so I look at it as like a guide. And so if you imagine and visualize, and I think you kind of do the hybrid of a guide and a coach because you're like, I love that you use the word cheerleader. It's like I'm advocating for people. And I picture it like if we're in the external world, we're going on a hike and I know because I've experienced hiking before and maybe you've never hiked before, but we're going on a trail we've never been on and you're guiding us through it. As a client, you're going, oh, let's go over here. I want to check this out. But it's going internal to the subconscious space and knowing that you're safe because I'm there with you and without judgment, without criticism, but just holding that space for the person to unravel, like you were saying, whatever belief systems they've been conditioned to understand, whatever thoughts, because that's exactly right. Like there's a small percentage of our brain that kind of we think controls everything, but then there's a huge percentage of the subconscious that actually is making everything function. And that's the place, the source from which things we navigate the world. And so it's kind of like, well, if we kind of go in, especially when someone keeps hitting the same wall, like I'm sure you have clients who are like, every relationship kind of ends up with the same results or in the same kind of dynamic. There's like a pattern of dynamic. And so working, I believe within the subconscious starts to unravel that. I picture it like a big yarn ball. And instead of us as guides or coaches doing the work, unraveling, and then telling the person, this is how you knit it. It's allowing them to do it. And like, you're just holding the string to let them unravel whatever's been the blockage. That's kind of the metaphor I work with when thinking about subconscious work.
Yeah. I like to say, that emotions are meant to flow through us like water, right? And sometimes what happens is that we have clogs in the drain. So my goal by the time we are done working together is to make sure that we have unclogged the drain thoroughly. And because oftentimes folks don't know where those clogs are coming from and they're quite surprised at what comes up during these exercises. I'm sure you've seen that too.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yep. It's funny too, because I've worked with people and they'll be like, I'm not ready yet. They're like trying to prepare. And I'm like, you're essentially if your toilet was clogged and the plumber's coming, you've asked the plumber to work with you and like help you unclog your toilet. And then you're trying to do all these weird things and like throwing Drano. It's always that like weird hesitation. I'm sure you get people who are like curious. They want to get the help, but then they're like, maybe next month. And it's not for any other reason other than like they're trying to prepare. And I'm like, actually, what's great about this process, this work is like, you don't need to prepare. You can just show up. That's the beauty, like that's the best part of it. It's just showing up. It's kind of what you were saying earlier about intimacy and vulnerability, that relationship, the work that you're doing is also it's deeply intimate and allowing someone to be vulnerable.
It is. And, our brains do not like change. And so oftentimes what will happen is that, people show up and then their brains will be like, what do you think you're doing? This is scary, right? And if we can remember that our brains light up in the same way when we're experiencing nervousness versus excitement, they're actually the same emotion, right? That we can say, okay, am I nervous about this? Or am I just going to label this as excitement? Because both stem from this feeling of anticipation over something that has not yet happened. And so when clients, when I ask them, all right, so how are you feeling about getting started on the work? And they're like, I'm kind of nervous. I remind them of that and say, maybe we can call this excitement, right? So that's been a helpful reminder for me too in my day-to-day life when I'm doing something new, right? Like, am I really scared or am I actually excited about this? And reframing in that way.
I love the polarity of emotions because there's always the duality. There's always something on the other end. And like, it's what we've been conditioned or what we believe is the thing. And then if you kind of examine it, it's like, oh yeah, that thing can quickly shift to nervousness to excitement. And it's the same sensations in the body. It's the same thinking and patterns. I love that. Like rewriting the narrative. I think that was like restorying is kind of how you put it in the book as well. Like shifting the story.
Absolutely. And, a topic that comes up often in my work is jealousy, right? The emotion of jealousy. And I believe it's Brene Brown who offers this reframe on jealousy, where it's, let's think of jealousy actually as a cluster of emotions, because typically what you're feeling when you feel jealous is either fear or anger or sadness or a combination of all three. And so anyway, not to get too deep into the weeds here, but echoing what you're saying in regards to how we label emotions and really kind of digging deep, like, all right, well, is it that you're angry? Is it that you're scared? Or is it that you're sad? In what's making you feel this way as far as your partner or friendships when it comes to jealousy. But yeah, human emotions are just so fascinating to me.
Let's take a quick break. Back in 2012, I made the bold decision to ditch traditional shampoo, and I've never looked back. How did I do it, you ask? With Hair Story New Wash. This product is not just a shampoo or conditioner, it's a unique all-in-one solution that gently cleanses your hair while maintaining its natural balance. No more harsh chemicals stripping away your hair's vitality. Hair Story New Wash uses a carefully crafted blend of essential oils, aloe vera, and fatty acids that cleanse and nourish your hair without any of the harmful stuff you find in traditional products. Here's a little secret. I used to work at Hair Story from 2013 to 2017, and even after that, I couldn't find anything that compares. This is a product I truly believe in, and that's why I'm excited to share it with you today. As a listener of our podcast, by using the link we provided in the episode notes, you'll get an exclusive 15% off your first purchase of Hair Story New Wash. Say goodbye to the shampoo bottle clutter and hello to healthier, more vibrant hair with Hair Story New Wash. Click the link, enjoy the discount, and give your hair the love it deserves.
Not all lubes are created the same. Here at Head South, we've worked diligently to pare down the ingredients so there is no fuss and no unnecessary bits and bobs. Head South Intimacy Serums make it simple and easy for you to reduce friction and enhance pleasure. Listeners can get 20% off their first order of a starter kit using the code PODCAT24. That's PODCAT24. And now, back to the episode.
I'm excited you brought up jealousy because that's one of the things I wanted to talk about because I wanted to go over some myth busting with you. I'll lay out some myths around non-monogamy. And one of those is jealousy. So if you wouldn't mind if we can run through a few myths and then if you could debunk some of these. One of them is non-monogamy is just an excuse to cheat.
Okay, so if we're talking about ethical non-monogamy, right? Whether you call it ethical, consensual, that is not an excuse to cheat, because by definition, cheating is doing something that goes against the rules. And cheating is still possible in non-monogamous, ethically non-monogamous relationships. If you have understandings in place with your partner or partners and you go against those, right? You betray what those understandings are, that's still cheating. That's still infidelity. The reality is this. Our infidelity rates in air quotes monogamous relationships in this country are really high. And for women, they're going up year by year because we have more financial independence, because a lot of us are traveling outside the home, right, for work. We're catching up with men. Men's rates have stayed pretty constant. So people don't need an excuse to cheat. They're already doing it. What ethical non-monogamy does is brings, it speaks the quiet parts out loud. It brings this thing that so many people are doing. There's a shame that comes along with infidelity, being the one who cheats, being the one who's cheated on, and bringing that out into the open and saying, look, it is completely normal for us to find other people attractive. Do we want to create a scenario where this is above board if we want to act on those? And what are the parameters of what that's going to look like today? Because that could change 6 months from now, a year from now, a week from now. But yes, it is not just an excuse to cheat. It's actually a way to avoid calling it cheating in the first place.
The next myth would be non-monogamous relationships lack commitment.
Look, I mean, I think it really depends on how you define your non-monogamous relationship. It's such a spectrum. There are couples who have been married for decades, for example, and their particular flavor of non-monogamy is sometimes we go to swingers events and occasionally play with other couples who we don't really keep in touch with after that. Is that a lack of commitment? Versus, I'll use my own relationship as an example. I've been with my anchor partner for just shy of 6 years now. We live separately, right around the corner from each other though, and we are polyamorous, meaning we have other relationships with people. He is my anchor partner in that guy's my emergency contact. When my cat gets sick, when there's a family emergency, he is who I'm going to. We, by default, we spend the holidays together. So yes, he is getting priority in certain ways in terms of, if push comes to shove and I have to choose one person over the other, he will take priority. However, and I'm bringing this up because a lot of people don't believe in hierarchical polyamory. And what I say to this is he's also bearing the brunt of when things go wrong, he's picking up the slack. So, we're there for each other. I see him more as family, right? And so is that a lack of commitment? Call it what you want. With our divorce rates in this country, I would say that a lot of us are having a lack of commitment in monogamous relationships too. So you'll probably see that that's a theme of what I'm bringing up, that like, if we're calling something, some pejorative term, let's actually flip this around and take a look at what this looks like in the monogamous world too.
The next myth is jealousy doesn't exist in non-monogamy. And so I was curious, as you were speaking about you and your anchor partner, how do you guys navigate jealousy? Because it does exist. It exists because it is a human experience. And so regardless of the relationship style, status, whatever, it's going to be there because we are human. So how it doesn't not exist in non-monogamy, and then how do you personally navigate it or advise, your clients on navigating their own experiences with jealousy?
Yeah. So rates of jealousy are not any higher in non-monogamous relationships than monogamous ones. So I'll start off by saying that because a lot of people say, I could never do non-monogamy. I'm too jealous. Okay. So how do you navigate that in non-monogamy land, right? You got to talk about it. So I'll bring up an example of something that happened last year. I was traveling. I was out of town for a few weeks with my sister. My anchor partner and I, we have a Sunday ritual. I talk about that in my book. But part of our Sunday ritual is normally we play Scrabble together, and then there's a lot of other X-rated things that happen. But I was gone, and one of his other partners at the time was over at his place on a Sunday, and he had messaged me saying, hey, would you mind if we played Scrabble together? And my gut reaction was like, oh, well, hell no. Like, that's our thing that we do on Sundays, right? And so I had to go underneath that, like, well, is it that I'm angry? Is it that I'm scared? Or is it that I'm sad? And I think it was a combination of anger and sadness. The anger coming from like, oh my gosh, would you even think, the fact that you'd even think of doing that? And the sadness coming from a place of, oh, I thought this was just our special thing. And the fact that you might want to do this with somebody else leads me to believe that perhaps I was mistaken about that. So that's a conversation. And when I brought that up, he was like, Of course not. Like, I'm not going to do it. I was just checking with you. We have plenty of other board games we can play. And he got it, right? He understood. That's how you navigate this. And then perhaps you come up with understandings like, hey, I don't care if you play Scrabble with other people, but if this is like a Sunday night with one of your romantic partners, maybe you pick another game. Or, hey, if there's a movie I've been really wanting to see and we've talked about seeing it together, can you maybe wait instead of seeing that with another partner? But in the same way that you would with like a friend, right? So these are not experiences that are necessarily unique to non-monogamy, but we tend to silo them in that way in our brains. Really, as you said before, jealousy is a universal human emotion. And these are experiences that if we kind of take a step back, we can see come up in many facets of our life, in many platonic or monogamous relationships that we have too.
I love that you outlined Brene Brown's like the cluster. It's such an easy step to take, like step back and think about like what is the attached clustered emotions and kind of sit with those for a little bit and unravel those. Cause that can like I've had, jealousy when my sisters do something together and I'm like left out, or there's so many ways that jealousy shows up. And absolutely, this happens in monogamous relationships. It happens in non-monogamous relationships. It happens in friendships when like you have a routine or a ritual that you share with a friend. And then all of a sudden they're like, hey, I'm going for pizza at our favorite pizza place with this other person. Even as friends, platonic friends, it can sometimes be like, well, that was our thing. And I love that something that we as society can take away and learn from within non-monogamy is that level of communication that you actually have to have. Like you can't function in that style of relationship without having very open channels of communication and diving deeper. And so whether it's with if you're in a monogamous relationship or with a friend or family member, learning how to communicate and taking some of those big lessons from non-monogamy of like, hey, sometimes you do have to sit down and express your feelings, examine them first and then express them. And it's really beautiful that your anchor partner reached out first, like made consideration of like, hey, this actually might be something that could upset you. So there was like that level of consideration as well, that people like take a pause and consider like, this is our routine, this is our ritual. And then also the level of being able to hear you validate your experience is really beautiful and something that people need to see more of and hear more of. Like we don't get a lot of those examples within even like polyamorous. It's like always like even in media, it's starting to happen, but it's like, oh yeah, it's like trysts and like they're showing stuff in the bedroom, but they're not showing like how relationships function in a beautiful way.
Gosh. Kat, don't even get me started on media depictions of polyamory. I because that's a soapbox that could be an entire podcast episode. But I will say that being in polyamorous relationships, it's kind of like, I don't know if you've heard that saying, like, if you think you've done all the therapy and all the work, like try spending a holiday with your family, like that kind of like, it can re-trigger some of those more emotionally immature tendencies. But with non-monogamy, with polyamory, because of the level of communication it requires and the level of self-reflection, I'm able to really shine a flashlight on my own shit, for lack of a better term. I'm like, ooh, where's that coming from? And it's constantly surprising to me, the things that don't bother me and the things that do. And I come from a place of curiosity with my own reactions to things. It constantly surprises me, like who I think is my type. And then I'll be attracted to someone. I'm like, whoa, that is so cool. What's that about? So really coming from a place of curiosity and examining under a lens when things are coming up for you. And being non-monogamous forces you to do that. And so it's really just a level of knowing and a journey into deeper self-understanding, in addition to having the freedom to have multiple partners who can be romantic, can be sexual, can be both.
That leads to my next myth is non-monogamy is a phase or an experiment.
It can be. It can be. There are people, I like to think of non-monogamy as falling into two camps. So there is pragmatic non-monogamy, That can be, hey, we're the couple, we've been married a few decades. We want to spice things up. The kids are grown, they're out of the house. Like, let's go get naked with some other people. Pragmatic non-monogamy. Hey, we have mismatched libidos. We have mismatched kinks. Let's, open up just for the sake of meeting those needs. Hey, we're in a long distance relationship. Hey, you are bisexual and you would like to sleep with two genders. Pragmatic non-monogamy, right? Versus folks who are not wired to be monogamous in the same way that you might not be wired to be heterosexual, right? So it's an orientation versus a choice. I, as somebody who struggled very, very hard to maintain a monogamous lifestyle, I am not wired for it. For me, non-monogamy is an orientation. And so as far as it being a phase, yes, for some folks, they might say, yeah, let's try this out. Just like you might try out being vegan for a few months. I don't know. And then you scratch that itch, or you're like, this wasn't for me, or the things I thought I was trying to get out of this actually led me to realize that I'm just missing a lot of stuff in my underlying relationship, and maybe I'm just not in the right relationship. So I think it can be a phase. I'm going to put that in big old air quotes, in that this is something that you're experimenting with, right? And being curious about, but for some people, it's just how they're wired. And so that distinction, I think, is really important.
I love that, because I think in terms of these myths, it's something that people would say to dismiss non-monogamy. And it's absolutely okay, like, to explore, experiment, to have that experience, like you're saying, like pragmatic, and like deciding, like, I love the mismatched libidos or the disconnect with kinks, because it allows you to still be yourself fully with a partner, but maybe there's other aspects of you that you desire and would like to explore. And you opened the book with your own experience with a sex worker, and going and having those types of experiences for yourself. And I've interviewed sex workers on the podcast. I am a big advocate for that as a part of, it's in the same line of the work that you do, the work that a sex therapist does. You're providing services to help people fully like embody themselves. And it's just the modality in which that work is expressed. And so, I'm a big believer in destigmatizing sex work, because it is in line with a therapeutic holistic approach. It would be like saying, okay, yeah, there's doctors, but yoga instructors don't count. Like there's all of these branches of healing work, and all of it is valid, and whatever you're drawn to for people. And so I wanted to discuss, because I think everyone should read the book, but I would be remiss if we didn't talk about your transition in your career and how this work has informed you as a being. Like you dive so deep into it within the book. And so absolutely everyone should read it. But in a very brief synopsis, speaking to like how your relationships were affected by this transition in your career, professionally, or within your family, any parts of this, going from, the very heavy traumatic work within the DA office to empowering other women through your own story, if you would love to share.
Yeah. It's funny, because you would think that making that pivot would have burned bridges in some way for me, right? And if anything, it allowed me to get a lot closer to people. I have former colleagues, attorneys, judges, court reporters who reach out to me, and now they're allowed to have conversations about this stuff. Like, okay, so me and my husband, we've actually been swingers for a long time. Or, hey girl, I need a sex toy recommendation. There's no way they could have asked me these questions when we worked together, because that's a walking HR nightmare right there. And so I think certain people were shocked that I left this stable career that I was in for quite a long time, where I had a pretty good reputation, I'll say, and had built up a good reputation there. But to go off on my own and become an entrepreneur, but just with those folks, with my friends, they open up to me. I found a lot more about things because they know it's a safe space to talk about any sexual struggles they're having, dating struggles, relationship struggles. So the quality of my relationships with people has deepened. With my family, they're just like, oh gosh, Rena. My dad is actually one of my biggest cheerleaders. I have told him not to read my book like over and over and over again. He asked me for a signed copy. I gave him one, but I said, don't read this. And so I don't know whether he has or not because he can't tell me if he has because I told him not to. Yeah, there's varying degrees of acceptance within my family. Everyone's proud of me because they can see that I'm helping people. But insofar as, my nieces, they don't know the title of my book. They know that their aunt wrote a book, but like they don't know what it's about, kind of thing. So it's been a bit of a tightrope to walk, but I would say overall, I've had largely support from my family.
I love that. I too, like I started this journey about 2.5 years ago of creating products, doing the podcast. It was a big pivot. I was a hairdresser and I was a hair care consultant. So I was working with hair care brands for the past decade, and like making products, doing that sort of stuff. And so to literally from a dream about lubes, going downstairs and telling my dad, who is, my mom and dad are my biggest fans and supporters, but like my dad is very conservative and my mom was very open about sex. And I have a whole podcast episode with her because I was very lucky to have a mom who, like, when I told her I was ready to have sex, took me as a gynecologist to talk about birth control options at 17. Like I have had a very open channel with my mom, as well as my dad to a certain extent, but he was like Irish Catholic, military conservative. But when I told him, he was the second person I had told that I was going to do this. And he was like, absolutely. Like, how could we help? And it's really sweet because my dad will send me TikToks of people that I should talk to and he'll find things. And like, he's very much open, more so now. And so my relationships with my family around sex and conversations around intimacy has absolutely deepened. And I'm sure you get this as well, as like when you tell people what you do. Like I've met people at weddings and everyone's like, what do you do? And then I'll have people tell me some of the most like confidential information. And I'm like, wow, this is amazing. And like, I kind of feel like now I'm an air traffic controller. I'm like, oh, you should look into this person or read this book or kind of pointing people in the direction. But it's so, I feel like people are at the cusp of being ready to talk about it or have been holding it in. And I'm sure that's what you've experienced too. Is like, as soon as people heard, whether you knew them or don't know them, they're like ready to talk about sex and destigmatize it and remove some of their own shame around it. And like, I love that so much about this work that we're doing. It's been such an honor to kind of be a person to open up those channels for people and witness that just with strangers, friends, family. I really love what we're doing.
Yeah, same. And I feel like, it's almost like we're permission givers by stating what we do for work. Then people are like, oh, okay, I'm allowed to talk about this with this person. Like, I don't know how many times you've experienced somebody saying, I've never actually told anyone this before, but, right, fill in the blank. Because that happens to me all the time.
Yeah.
And it's an honor.
That happens to me all the time. And it's such an honor. I mean, I had that when I was a hairdresser as well. Like hairdressers literally hold everyone's secrets. But at this level of like when I say like I work in sexual wellness and the level at which people confide and we give people, I love that you said that, like we absolutely give people permission to explore pleasure. And it's such an honor to do this kind of work.
We got great jobs.
We've got an excellent purpose and life right now. I'm really, really happy with the work that I do. And I'm really, really happy within that work to have met you. So how do people find you?
All right. Well, you can find me on Instagram. It's _Rena.Martine_, or you can head on over to my website, which is renamartine.com.
Thank you so much. If there's anything we missed or anything you'd like to close with or share, take your time.
Yeah. I would just invite whoever's listening to this to ask yourself this question, which is, what would my life look like if shame weren't an option? What would I be doing differently if I could live fearlessly? And once you can paint a picture of what that would look like, what's one baby step I can take this week to just getting one little step closer to that? So that's my gift, my parting gift to anyone listening to this today.
Thank you so much. That's beautiful. Now I'm thinking about what if I remove shame, what would I do? What direction I would move in? So thank you for that, because that's a gift for me as well.
You're welcome.
Special thanks to all of our guests. Head South is hosted by Kat Meyer, produced by Isis Barlow, edited by Megan Hook, with music by Lily Rezi Rothman, graphics by Ella Chodos Irvine, cover art by Gina Ship Casey, and intro by Murph Meyer.
If you're looking for